Hey everyone, I'm here today with Steve Horne. Steve is one of our Queensland-based investigators and facilitators, and Steve does a lot of work with us on the international front as well as local, and I thought it's probably a good opportunity to talk to him about some of his experiences. Thanks for joining me, Steve.
Thanks for inviting me, Luke. It's good to have a chance to talk through.
Excellent. So tell me a bit about yourself. What's your background?
My background's in predominantly mining, but started in construction and general industry many years ago, and I won't put a time on that, it's many years back. But that all evolved from a very successful military career, which I suppose lends itself a little bit to the travel that we do now as a global company and being part of the team travelling overseas. So I was with the military in UK and Australia for about 15 years. Gained a lot of technical expertise and qualifications through that period, which enabled me then to work through industry, climb through the various leadership roles, and eventually aligned with work that was being done by SafetyWise way back in the early days, and with Jerry Gibb and Joe Delandre, and moved into some senior safety roles at the time, and there was always the pinnacle of trying to run an investigation and get the best outcome, the right outcome that satisfied everybody, including finding the cause. And it was only when I started working with Jerry and Graham as well to move through utilising the ICAM process that I realised that this was the opportunity we were looking for with the businesses I was working in. That gave me an opportunity then to work with Jerry a bit more, and I migrated across to SafetyWise. And that was about 11, 12 years ago now. Been onwards and upwards since then.
Absolutely. So obviously you've been around a little bit. What sort of locations have you worked in?
Been very lucky.
I guess with SafetyWise and outside of SafetyWise.
Yeah, well, outside of SafetyWise, most of my travel was with the military. That was around the world, various locations, some nice, some not, and I did get the t-shirts. Which morphed into revisiting some of those actually while working with SafetyWise, but then stepping out into areas you wouldn't think that we'd be using investigation tools, safety management tools, and assisting and coaching. So they include mainly through the Caribbean, the West Indies, a lot of the African countries, Papua New Guinea, Pakistan, India, through the whole of China, and with SafetyWise, that's also taken me now up to Mauritania, the Islamic State of Mauritania, back into Senegal, Dakar, and across to Eritrea. Areas like that predominantly need to be understood as to why we would be visiting those with safety management systems, ICAM investigation tools. Those countries are coming out of some pretty long-term political stifling for business and industry situations, which in fact with Eritrea has involved being at war with Ethiopia for the last 30 years. We were one of the first companies, SafetyWise, to go in and work with the mining industry there, which is evolving, and it was interesting working with people that have known at the age of 25 nothing else but war, and now the industry is being able to shrug off those shackles and they can work in an interesting environment as they evolve and they're hungry for information. So going in with SafetyWise and doing work in countries like that is awesome. And at the moment we're doing a lot of work around Africa, all the way up the eastern coast through the Horn of Africa and across to the central, and then across to the western part as well. And locality around here, Papua New Guinea as well.
I think what was surprising for me coming into the business is you know that it's a global business. I've discovered countries I didn't even know existed. You know, when you get a phone call or an email and you're doing the quick search, where's that?
That's right. Well, one of those would be, and I must admit I was the same when I first heard about Burkina Faso.
That was one I looked at. I won't deny that was one I looked at. I think what also surprised me is countries where I seriously never considered we would be, like Kazakhstan, for example. That stunned me, and the fact that we deliver in Russian, and previously we've done quite a bit in Russian, and I guess like a lot of people, my perception is what you see on the internet about Russia and stuff like that, and
it's a very interesting.
It's totally different.
It is totally different. The mindset is completely different. You need to connect with the workers, and dropping the word vodka every now and then is helpful. They seem to then link with you. You talk in their language, and you learn those little idiosyncrasies. And it's not seen as not the norm or a politically incorrect approach. It does put a smile on their face. And when you're going through an interpreter, you never, which is what we do, all our materials in Chinese, Russian and various other languages, you're using an interpreter. You don't fully know what the interpreter's interpretation of the mannerism, the intent of the colloquial interpretation is. Yeah. So you're looking for reaction. And often you don't get what you would normally have as a reaction in your own country. And so you have to work a little bit harder. But then accept that there are going to be differences and don't try to push your own. Yeah. Go with it, be respectful. And going through an interpreter in Russian was specifically interesting because when we run things like the 5 whys, we will say there is an activity, why did that happen? Because of, why did that happen? In Russian, when I was first introduced this through an interpreter, the wording came through like why, and in Russian, imuchiku, and then straight up imuchiku, and it was as if they were singing. And I was trying to keep a straight face, but also understand the pronunciation, the way it was coming out, completely alien language to myself. But the way the words were formed, they were novel, and it was quite interesting to follow through. Having done, and we've worked there now around the peripheral of Russia, through Mongolia and Kyrgyzstan and Kazakhstan, doing a lot of work with ICAM through there. And the Russian language interpretation material that we have is assisting us, and that's standard throughout all of those countries, which is awesome. And I guess we build a basis of expertise within safety-wise where that information is not discarded, it is built up and shared with the consultants, and that builds our expertise to be professional going back into those countries and working with those clients and understanding their requirements.
I'll come to investigations in a minute, but let's put on not just an investigator hat, perhaps a safety manager hat, or someone who's looking to go into like a fly in, fly out, or even a residency role in a foreign country. What do you think the biggest challenges are for people in those environments? Putting aside obvious things like language, what other challenges are sitting there, and how do you overcome them? Look, let's talk safety-wise. As part of that, you're only there for 2 or 3 days. It's not like you've got a chance to embed yourself and get to know people and stuff like that. So it's harder again.
I think the one thing I've taught myself is to roll with the unexpected, and that really comes down to, as a FIFO worker, when you first start with a business, especially in Australia, the logistics are usually worked out for you, and you're expected to be at an airport at a certain time. It's going to take a certain amount of time. You've got to take certain kit with you. You're allowed to wear certain things. And then when you get to the other end, there's going to be arranged transport and accommodation, and you're going to go with the flow, and it's all sorted. That is often the case in business, and it does work quite smoothly, but it is usually a very strict time frame, and you're rushing. They want you at work straight away. The FIFO environment is very demanding from that point. You're still carrying with you, as a FIFO worker in Australia or maybe overseas, you're still carrying with you your connection with your family, your loved ones and so on, and there's going to be a period of time that you're away from that. So you're transitioning through that mentally, plus trying to look to how you're going to approach your work going forward, knowing that it's going to be for the next 7 days, 14 days, or if you're in Africa, for the next 7 weeks, which is a lot longer. Yeah.
So how do you manage that? I guess with family, with your wife, for example. We've sent you to Africa for 3-4 weeks at a time. Yeah. How do you manage that yourself? How does she manage that?
It doesn't work for everybody, and I do have a lot of conversations with colleagues where they will ask those specific questions. They like the idea, even of a FIFO worker or the type of work we do, and other businesses. We obviously interact with other businesses when we're on site, and you'll see some of them are struggling, and they will talk about, I've got problems with the insurance being paid, or the credit card bill, or the children going to the dentist, or assisting the wife. And those are real things. The planning beforehand, you can't go into a FIFO job or onto a contract where you're going to be away for a period of time and think those things are going to take care of themselves. forward planning is critical, that's for sure. But that's easy to say, and everything else takes up time in your life. But you're going to have to make allowances for that. You can't push it back. And if you do not manage something like that, it grows. Yeah. So I normally generate a list, and they are, and I love lists being from the military, and they are the prioritising, and sometimes those priorities are in motion fluidly quite often, where you knock off and you ensure that you are achieving and you are actually addressing those. Even though, and especially with the work we do with SafetyWise, we will be heavily engrossed in an investigation or assisting and coaching. You have to focus fully on that. You can't do that if these lists aren't being checked and ticked off. So you need to keep yourself open, honest, on track.
Absolutely,
it is a big process.
I think unfortunately a lot of people have this wrong notion that travel is a romantic thing. You know, you travel to a foreign country or a foreign city and stay in a motel. But I think people forget the other side. You know, you're in a motel on your own. You have dinner on your own. You wake up on your own.
That's right.
You go to work. And a lot of people have said to me, having done a lot of travel, certainly locally, have dinner with people from work, but you sort of don't want that. You also want to switch off as well, and
true.
It can be hard.
And when we're working with clients, there's often the need to digest a lot of information, to review. The client often, while we're working through investigations, will be on a timeline, or there'll be some criticality for interpretation of information, and we'll often do that in the hotels overnight or at the weekend, so that builds on that as well. It can be romantic at the beginning, and people often refer to going to Ethiopia, and those that are in the know, especially with the current time, will know that the coffee beans, Arabica and others, we seem to associate with the Middle East, but in fact I only found out when we were there working at the beginning of the year that they actually evolved from Ethiopia, and certain people will know that, and it's a romantic association with getting these fresh coffee beans grown at source from the original. So there's certain things that certain countries will have. Africa has a big attraction for it because of the safaris and other type of aspects, and people see that very romantically. But when you're actually, as you say, by yourself, on a contract, working with a client, and you're going to different countries, you've got to plan visas, currency, language, general neutral topics that you can talk about to keep the conversation going. But safety and security has got to be up there, as well as the emotional side.
Well, so let's talk investigation specifically. So what's been your experiences in some of these countries doing investigations, you know, that's different to here in Australia, like cultural issues, for example?
Well, cultural and legal, I think, are the two clashes that often happen. You can go to some of the Middle Eastern and possibly the Asian countries where there is a heavy emphasis on legislation. You will have either legal, government inspectors, industrial relations in other guises will be prominent in every step you do. In Australia, we can dissect and separate that. And we have an understanding of how it works. You go to another country, you can't expect that suddenly you're going to have the same impact. That is going to be heavily overridden. You are going to be scrutinised. They will have people sitting in, listening to what you're saying while you're interviewing. And it's frustrating. You have to work with that. From a cultural point of view, I find, again, making up the list beforehand, there's a need to understand that you can't use the same tone and mannerisms, Australian colloquialisms, various other aspects like line of sight, looking at someone because you've got this perceived thing that you've seen on CSI, that if you look at their eyes a certain way, you're going to tell if they're telling the truth, or your body language. That doesn't work. And it is very offensive.
Well, even looking at eyes can be quite offensive to some people. It's a confrontational thing, isn't it?
It is. And overseas, you walk into a situation that people are not comfortable anyway. They're trying to accept you as a person from another country overseas. And if you concentrate too much on that, it becomes very, very intimidating, and it is offensive. The other thing is understanding that different countries where you go over there, they will try or wish to get more information from you before or after your interaction with them. In other words, at a quiet time after the course, because they have real concerns, or they're not of a character where they want to talk about things, comfortable talking in a general group. So allowing for time, and I do this specifically, and I know it's going to happen now, and so I allow for that, before and after, and I am not adverse if there is a requirement to set up a session like we're doing now to talk about this process after the course has run, as opposed to allowing people to video anything or take photos, which can be very compromising and off-putting and disconnect what we're doing on a particular day. So making time to associate, you can build very good relationships by doing that.
Yeah.
By showing that you're willing to put in the time.
Yeah.
I think respect, mannerisms, language, research, and research is again a throwaway word, but if you haven't looked at where you're going and where the next location might be and how you're connecting those, security and safety must definitely come in as well, especially with the global, the way the global entity is now for business people travelling.
For sure.
With the way the world is.
I did some work a few years ago with an employer. I was flown over to Kuala Lumpur to run a workshop for their L&D team, and it was about writing assessment tools for their L&D and training departments. And there was a mix of Indian, Chinese, Japanese, Malaysian, and others there. And it was a big eye opener for me, you know, especially when you talk a technical topic. Do you understand what I'm talking about? Yes. And then,
Yes.
and yes was the answer to everything. And it's only as you started to probe and started to sort of settle in, you go, that's not the case at all. But
That's exactly. And I guess that's a very strong topic in countries that are developing now.
Yeah.
You will inevitably get that.
Yeah.
Yes, because they're not comfortable to say no or to push back.
Or do it publicly. Yeah.
Yes, that's right. Do it publicly.
Yeah.
And that means developing, especially if you're involved with a business where you're delivering some training or a concept that needs to be broken down, assisting and coaching, methods of how you check understanding. And of course, train the trainer courses and what we do now with our competencies to be training and assessors. A lot of that is being built in now, and it's going in a very good direction to make us all a lot more acquainted with what the requirements are with the socio-economic side of it. And I think that's a key area. There's nothing worse, especially for a prestigious company like us working globally, to go in, work with a company for 2 or 3 days, even present for 2 or 3 days, and come away without knowing whether that has actually been understood and losing that opportunity for that to develop within the business. So that is something, not only feedback sheets, but there's methods you can use during a session to ensure there has been an understanding. Not all literacy based. In some cases it needs to be action based, and some people will be very good at putting that across, developing the tools, the charts, etc. It is confronting sometimes, and there are times when you realise that hasn't worked, and with the group we've required extra time to go back and work with the group because there have been problems. And for example, there have been times where we would, in Australia, run a 2-day lead investigator course, and that is, in most cases, adequate for people to attend for the first time, some basic knowledge and literacy, and with our tools that we have and the methods of training, we can take them through to a very good standard.
Yeah.
In other countries, we've adapted that from 2 days through to, in fact, 8 days.
Yes.
Because there has been a requirement for a complete makeover within the business, and to not only do the electronic, the practical work in the way of charts, developing reports, but also to coach people, the teams, through the actual nuts and bolts over 3 or 4 days extra. And that's awesome. It means they're committed. It's not just ticking a box.
Yeah, for sure.
We're getting that.
And I think that's part of that. You're sort of almost unlearning how you've done things previously. You're learning a new process, new methodology, new terminology, things like that.
That's true, and that works at the shop floor level all the way through to management level.
For sure.
Often with the overseas teams, the discussions will be around, well, we make these decisions based on the corporate risk interpretation or charts. We've managed that very well so far. And at the end of the discussion, training, governance course that we run, you often have a discussion, well, that's what we were doing. We realise now we were quite a long way off the mark. And that changes the governance. And that often comes back to the way we've done things before. We've identified who's at fault, and we've managed that. Whereas, of course, that doesn't find the root cause or the reason why. So it is a complete makeover sometimes.
Yeah, for sure. So let's talk about returning home, how do you transition back to home? What's your secrets?
I have an arrangement with my wife that we'll definitely not talk about going out for a meal directly, because I've usually been out for meals for the last few months. So it's definitely in-house meals, nice and comfy. And there's usually simple things such as enjoying a good cup of tea with good tea and good milk, and trusted water in some cases.
Yes.
And that might then go to a need to work out what's happening activity-wise over the next few days, interacting with grandchildren, family that you haven't seen for a while, and of course with your wife. But also knowing that when we come back from these projects, there is also a need to deliver with a client and follow up. And often that is writing a report, etc.
So you're not actually switching off in some cases.
No, you're taking a day off to brain dump, maybe clear your head, and maybe a couple of days, depending on what your activities are. When you get back, there may be other criteria or schedules that you have to meet, but then you've got to kick back in. So I find myself working through that first day, reacquainting and getting family issues bedded in and anything else, and then prioritising, but then coming back into work with the Safety-Wise group on any reports or the company that we're working with. And again, that doesn't work for everyone. If you've got young kids, I haven't at the moment, mine are grown up, which is great, or you have other issues to do with demographics or where you are, in the fact your wife might work, and there's other issues and vehicles and many different things that
for sure.
Work through.
Having
an arrangement is
absolutely. I know from my time, again, so most of mine was local work. Mine was about sort of not having deep and meaningful conversations for that first, even just overnight. Let's talk the next day. Let's just wind down, sort of shut down the brain, reacquaint with the kids. As silly as that may sound, but you need to. You get out of that work mode, get into home mode or play mode or whatever it may be.
And this will be the same for the guys that are doing FIPO work. Exactly right, yes. And you want to rip into it and get involved with the family straight away, but you're right.
Absolutely. And you've also got that fatigue issue. I mean, fatigue obviously with not only the duration of the days, particularly with an investigation, but you've also got that fatigue from travel. You've got the fatigue with a high stress investigation and high pressure.
Jet lag, time differences.
All of that, absolutely. Yeah,
that's true. And I think the other thing that needs to be considered nowadays going overseas is allowing more time and understanding the need of countries' immigration policies, and that can be very, very stressful going through some of those, especially some of the more remote locations where you need to meet that criteria, and it can be quite abrupt and very disciplined, and that can, you've got to go through those, and it can be quite confronting. Coming back, debriefing, de-stressing, and how you do that. So strategies need to be put in place and need to be built. Lucky enough, part of the global team with ICAM, we're well structured with a couple of things. First of all, we do our research as a company with our travel agents, and we develop a risk map, as well as locating where we're going to be at each time and understanding the risks in each of those areas, and that's a must. You can't not do that. It's like registering with the government for travel overseas.
For sure.
And then, of course, understanding when you come back, there may have been concern from your loved ones or other members of the family as to where you've been, and they may be generally concerned of your travel, and so debriefing on that as well. Not trying to sweep it under the carpet or any macho side to things. You do need to talk that through.
Absolutely. Would you recommend that type of lifestyle? What's your thoughts?
That's a very good question, because I often get asked this, and in fact we're in the middle of running an investigation here in Melbourne at the moment, and I did get that asked by one of the contractor groups that we're working with, and the answer I gave him was that you have to be in the right position, the right time in life, and everything needs to line up. It's not the sort of thing you can say, I'll try for a few months and then if I don't like it I'll step out of, because it's a massive commitment.
Absolutely.
And you're going to be setting various things up to enable you to do this. So it's whether you're at the right time of life, your relationships are correct, at that stage, and you may start off very slow by working locally and spending like FIFO type times away, and then see whether you can go overseas. But it has to be said that working overseas outside of Australia is, even though technology allows us for teleconferencing now, there is nothing better than the hand in hand and working one-on-one and coaching practically and manually with individuals. We are looking at all the various technologies and deploying those, but that still works better most times overseas.
For sure. Man, I appreciate it. That was excellent. Thank you.
Nice catching up
Thanks for
with
your
you.
time.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. I hope you enjoyed that. By all means, drop a line below if you've got any questions. Let us know, and we'll come back to you and let you know our thoughts and so forth. Thanks for your time.